More and more farmers are turning to indoor sprouted grain systems this winter, and almost all of them are asking the wrong question. Can sprouted grain replace hay? But once you look at the numbers, the dry matter, the cost, the yields, the energy, you'll see that the answer isn't just yes or no. It's far more interesting. Today, we're going to strip away the marketing, run the real math, and find out exactly what sprouted grain does and doesn't replace in a winter ration. Across most of the country, hay prices in 2025 are still hitting farmers hard. A bale that used to cost $6 to $8 is now $12 to $18 in many regions. And in drought-hit areas, it can jump past $20 without warning. Diesel hasn't come back down either, so hauling hay often costs as much as the hay itself. And fertilizer? Still high, still unpredictable. So winter feeding has quietly become the most expensive part of running a farm, especially for anyone with goats, sheep, or dairy animals. That's why so many farmers are asking the same question right now. Can sprouted grain actually save me money this winter? It's easy to see the appeal. You don't need acreage. You don't need irrigation. You don't even need good weather. Just a shed, a few trays, and some barley or wheat seed. And in 6 days, you've got a carpet of fresh green feed when everything outside is dead and brown. On paper, it looks like a miracle. Low water use, little space, predictable daily harvests, and a steady supply of greens all winter long. But here's where things get interesting, and where a lot of people misunderstand what sprouted feed really is. Because it might look like hay, and it might feel like hay, but nutritionally and economically, it plays a completely different role. To understand that role, we need to start with the basics. Sprouted grain, or fodder, is really just controlled germination. Nothing fancy. You take barley, wheat, or oats, soak the seed overnight, spread it into trays, keep it warm and moist, and 6 days later, you're holding a bright green mat of roots and shoots. It looks impressive, smells fresh, and animals absolutely love it. But here's the part most people get wrong. All that bulk is mostly water. Fresh sprouted fodder is usually 82 to 88% moisture. Hay, on the other hand, is 85 to 90% dry matter. That means a 12-pound tray of fodder is really only giving you about 2 pounds of actual feed once you remove the water. And this one detail completely changes the conversation. Sprouted grain is not a one-for-one replacement for hay, because it wasn't designed to be. Instead, it's a nutrient-dense supplement. It boosts digestibility, adds protein and vitamins, and helps your animals get more out of the hay they're already eating. Think of hay as the bulk that keeps the digestive system running. Think of sprouted grain as the performance booster that improves what the hay does. So the real question isn't, can sprouted fodder replace hay? It's, what does a tray actually produce, and is it worth the effort? And that's where the math gets eye-opening. Before we talk about savings or nutrition, we need to get honest about what one tray of sprouted grain actually gives you. Because this is where most people get surprised. A standard 10x20 tray produces about 12 pounds of fresh fodder in 6 days. It looks like a lot. It's green, it's heavy, it feels impressive. But once you remove the moisture, that entire tray only contains about 2 pounds of real dry matter. That's the part your animals actually live on. To grow that tray, you start with 2 pounds of barley seed, around 80 cents worth. The LED lights and pump add roughly another 20 cents. Water is almost nothing. But the part nobody includes is time. Rinsing, soaking, flipping trays, feeding out the mats. Even a small setup takes a few minutes a day, and when you value that labor realistically, the daily cost of one tray usually crosses $4. So when you do the math, that shiny green mat ends up costing about $2 per pound of dry feed. Hay, even at today's higher prices, usually sits closer to 20 or 30 cents per pound of dry matter. And that tells us something immediately. Sprouted grain is never going to replace hay on bulk or cost. But it can deliver something hay doesn't. And that's where things get interesting. So if sprouted grain can't beat hay on cost or bulk, why do so many farmers still swear by it? Because nutritionally, sprouted grain does something hay simply can't. When a seed begins to sprout, the entire chemistry of that grain changes. Starches convert into simple sugars, proteins become more digestible, vitamins multiply, and enzymes switch on. In just 6 days, the grain transforms from a hard, starchy kernel into a living, nutrient-rich feed. Most grass hay sits around 8 to 12% protein. Alfalfa might reach 15 to 20%, but sprouted barley routinely tests 15 to 18%, with higher enzyme activity and better digestibility than either one. And that's why university trials, from Utah State to Melbourne, all report the same thing. Animals don't necessarily eat more when you add fodder. They just use their feed better. Dairy animals show 10 to 15% bumps in milk output with no increase in total intake. Poultry often lay stronger shells and richer yolks. Sheep and goats hold body condition more easily through the winter. It's not about volume, it's about efficiency. Sprouted grain doesn't fill the animal. Hay does that. But sprouted grain supercharges the ration they're already eating. And that leads us to the big question this entire video is trying to answer. Does that efficiency make sprouted grain a legitimate hay replacement or not? That's what we tackle next. So here's the question. Everyone asks the moment they see a rack full of bright green sprouted grain, can this actually replace hay? To answer that, we need to talk about the one measurement that actually matters in livestock nutrition: dry matter intake. Not how heavy the fodder feels in your hands, not how green it looks, not how lush the tray appears. Dry matter is the real fuel animals run on, the solid nutrients left over once all the water is gone. Most ruminants, cows, goats, sheep, need about 2 to 2.5% of their body weight in dry matter every single day. For a 1,000-pound cow, that's 20 to 25 pounds of real feed. That's just baseline maintenance. And here's the critical part. A full tray of sprouted grain only delivers about 2 pounds of dry matter, no matter how big and green it looks. So to replace hay entirely, you'd need 10, 12, sometimes 15 trays every single day for one animal. The numbers simply don't work. Not in labor, not in cost, and not in physical volume. And even if the economics made sense, the biology doesn't. Ruminants need long stem fiber, the kind only hay or pasture provides. It keeps the rumen moving, it maintains gut health, and it gives the animal the physical bulk it requires to function properly. Sprouted grain doesn't offer that. It digests quickly, provides no rumen structure, and can't physically fill the animal the way hay does. So the verdict is simple. Sprouted grain cannot replace hay. Not economically, not physically, not nutritionally. But that doesn't mean it's useless. In fact, this is where sprouted grain becomes far more interesting. Because while it will never replace hay, it can replace something much more expensive. And that's where farmers really start saving money. So if sprouted grain will never replace hay, why are so many farmers still using it? Simple. Hay isn't the most expensive part of winter feeding anymore. Grain is. Corn, oats, barley, pellets, all of them have climbed sharply in price the last 2 seasons. And unlike hay, which you can sometimes stretch with careful feeding, grain costs hit your wallet every single day. This is where sprouted grain becomes interesting. When a grain sprouts, it isn't just changing shape, it's changing chemically. Starches break into simple sugars. Protein becomes more digestible. Vitamins and enzymes increase, and minerals become easier for the animal to absorb. That transformation makes the entire ration work better. Multiple university trials found the exact same thing. When animals get sprouted grain, they often eat 25 to 40% less grain while maintaining or even improving performance. Dairy goats hold milk output. Poultry produces richer yolks. Small ruminants maintain body condition more easily. And that's the real financial benefit. Not replacing hay, but reducing grain, the most expensive part of winter feeding. Over a full season, that reduction can add up to serious savings, even for small herds. And because sprouted grain is fresh, moist, and enzyme-rich, it supports digestion in a way dry grain simply can't. So the real question was never, can sprouted grain replace hay? It's, can sprouted grain stretch my hay and cut my grain bill at the same time? And used correctly, it absolutely can. Now let's look at how much hay sprouted grain can realistically replace without hurting your animals. So now that we know sprouted grain can't replace hay completely, the next question is, How much hay can it realistically reduce? And here's where real-world farm trials line up almost perfectly. Across goats, sheep, and dairy animals, sprouted grain typically replaces about 10 to 30% of the hay they would normally eat. Not because it adds bulk, it doesn't, but because it makes the rest of the ration more efficient. Animals digest their hay better. They pull more nutrients out of every bite. They maintain body condition on slightly less roughage. And they stay satisfied because the fodder adds moisture, enzymes, and energy that dry hay alone can't provide. It's not a magic trick, it's biology. Sprouted grain jumpstarts the digestive system, helping animals use their forage more completely. And when digestion improves, hay consumption naturally falls just a little. But there's a limit. Ruminants still need long-stem fiber to keep their rumen working. That's why sprouted grain never replaces hay entirely. It supports it. It stretches it. It makes the hay you already have go noticeably further, especially during winter when every bale matters. Used correctly, sprouted grain becomes the difference between burning through hay at full speed and getting an extra few weeks or even a full month out of your supply. And for some animals, especially non-ruminants, sprouted grain can go even further. That's what we'll look at next. Everything we've talked about so far has focused on ruminants, goats, sheep, because they rely on long-stem fiber to keep the rumen running. For them, sprouted grain can only stretch hay, not replace it. But for non-ruminants, the story is completely different. Animals like poultry, rabbits, ducks, quail, and even pigs don't need that long fiber structure. Their digestive systems aren't built around fermentation chambers the way ruminants are. So for them, sprouted grain is far more than a supplement. It can become the main winter green feed, or even a full replacement for commercial pellets and scratch. Backyard chicken keepers see this immediately. Egg yolks deepen in color, shells get stronger, and birds stay active and bright through the coldest months, even when pasture is gone. Rabbits show better coat quality and hydration. Ducks and quail respond with higher egg fertility and steadier laying. And because these animals eat far less dry matter than ruminants, a little fodder goes a long way. A single tray can feed dozens of birds or an entire row of rabbit hutches. In these systems, sprouted grain isn't fighting hay. It's replacing expensive store-bought feed. That's why small animal operations are the biggest fans of fodder systems. The economics work, the nutrition works, and the labor stays manageable. But before you rush to build a rack and start soaking grain, there's one last thing to understand, the practical reality of running a system day after day. That's where we're headed next. Before you rush to build a sprouted grain setup, there's one last truth you need to hear. Fodder systems live and die on daily consistency. They look simple, a few trays, a light, a little water, but even a small rack needs soaking, rinsing, draining, and cleaning every single day. Miss a day, and you'll see it. Miss two, and you'll be tossing whole mats into the compost. It's not backbreaking work, but it's daily work. And scale changes everything. A couple of trays fit anywhere, a mudroom, a heated corner of the barn, even a closet. But once you grow beyond a handful of racks, humidity rises, airflow becomes a challenge, and mold becomes a real risk. The system demands more attention, not less. That's why most successful setups are small, enough to make a difference, not enough to take over your life. For chickens, rabbits, or a few goats, it's fantastic. For a family cow, still manageable. But for a beef herd, the labor will drain you faster than winter ever could. Sprouted grain works best when it stays small, focused, and consistent. So after all the numbers, the nutrition, and the reality checks, here's the honest answer. Sprouted grain will never replace hay. It doesn't have the fiber, the bulk, or the dry matter to do that job. But that's not why it's valuable. Its power is in the gaps, in the places winter feeding hurts the most. Sprouted grain stretches hay a little, reduces grain a lot, boosts digestion, and adds fresh, living nutrition right when animals need it most. Used correctly, it can lower your grain bill, ease the strain on your hay supply, and keep your herd healthier through the toughest months of the year. And for non-ruminants, chickens, ducks, rabbits, sprouted grain can replace commercial feed almost entirely. It's not a replacement for your barn full of hay. It's a tool that makes what you already have go further. For some farms, that's worth a little daily labor. For others, it isn't. But now you know the real numbers, the ones most videos never talk about. And with those numbers, you can decide whether sprouted grain belongs on your farm this winter. That's the real story behind sprouted grain, where it works, where it doesn't, and how to use it without wasting time or money. If this helped you understand the numbers, hit like so more farmers can find it. And if you want more clear, practical breakdowns like this, make sure to subscribe. Now I'm curious. Are you planning to try sprouted grain this winter? For which animals? Let me know in the comments. Your questions usually shape the next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.